What did you eat this morning for breakfast? Do you know what plants and animals made up every ingredient? Do you know where these plants and animals lived their lives before finding their way to your plate? How far did this food travel to meet you where you are today? And to whose benefit was this food produced and sold to you? I would like you to consider these questions as we move forward. My name is Malcolm Oliver, and thank you for tuning in to this podcast entitled Biodynamic Farming: Resilience in the Face of Climate Change. While the culmination of my Quest degree has officially been my Keystone project, I simply see it as one piece in a complex puzzle. Very quickly after arriving at Quest in my first year, I realized, as I'm sure many other Quest students do, that I have undertaken a process of discovery. This involved not only learning content from various classes, but also reimagining my place in this world and how systems operate outside of myself. Classes such as self-culture and society, feminism, and posthumanism taught me to be critical of myself and the world around me, while also showing me hidden connections between and among every living thing. I found myself constantly challenged by the task of defining my degree, because what I had learned to that point encouraged me to question the rigid intellectual and structural boundaries that allow us to put pieces of this world into separate boxes. While still feeling unsettled by focusing on one question, I eventually decided to ask, how do we foster resilient food systems? This question allowed my inquiry to be, on any given day, as broad or specific as I wanted, because, well, if you really think about it, everything could be thought of as food. Every living thing eventually dies and becomes, in some ways, simply a concentration of valuable nutrients which another animal eats to sustain their own life. We spend our lives eating while simultaneously being eaten by bacteria, and then eventually our bodies become food for a community of decomposing critters. Humans are part of an intimate relationship with other living creatures, through our act of eating them and by being eaten by them. I wanted to research ways that humans and other living things could work together to create balance. This mentality, I found, was in stark contrast with the norms of greed and domination fueled by capitalist consumer culture, which can be observed in North America and around the world. I saw this norm as not only a perpetrator of massive injustice, but also the degradation of the world that we depend on, and evidence that the capitalist system is not a resilient one. Climate change is an obvious and prevalent example of the global degradation that this system is creating. While it is easy enough to think about these concepts in an abstract way, I also wanted to allow this process to shape my life direction following Quest. I became interested in becoming a farmer and decided to focus my attention on an investigation of the theoretical, social, and political relationships that various styles of farming can create. Much of the food we eat in North America is produced through an industrial system which isolates every food crop into a monoculture, in which every farmer only produces one type of food. Furthermore, within this industrial system, food can travel great distances, allowing us to have the same access to food with consistent prices wherever you go and regardless of the time of year. However, this mode of production is causing an increasing stress on farmers and agricultural land. Farms have been massively consolidated to a small number of landowners, and farmers are forced to take out massive loans every year to pay for seeds, fertilizer, pesticides, and farm infrastructure. This shift to industrial agriculture over the last few hundred years took the center focus away from producing food and onto paying off loans and making a profit. Furthermore, farmers are becoming increasingly reliant on synthetic fertilizers and pesticides as extreme weather events and changes in precipitation patterns increase due to climate change. I would like to quickly zoom in and talk about an example of how this can happen. Years ago, Monsanto engineered a strain of food crops that are resistant to a chemical called glyphosate, more commonly known as Roundup. These Roundup resistant, or Roundup ready, crops could grow while every other plant in the area would be killed by the chemical. This allows farmers to spend less time and money on managing weeds and assured that the nutrients from the soil wouldn't be stolen by the weeds. However, during the non-growing season, the soil is left completely bare, and all the tiny plants that would have otherwise held the soil structure together have been killed. This can either result in compacted soil, which is a sign of poor soil nutrients, or soil erosion as a result of heavy precipitation events. Because climate change is increasing the frequency and severity of these extreme events, farmers are forced to increasingly supplement their soil with the use of fertilizer to assure that crops have enough nutrients to make food. While the solution has, for the most part, been successful in maintaining crop yields, farmers are forced to spend more every year on fertilizers, and topsoil is eroding at a much faster rate than it is being regenerated. It is clear that this system has an expiration date, especially due to increasing climate change effects. I decided to investigate some alternative farming strategies and examine them through the lens of resilience. Some key components of resilience are diversity and redundancy. In a farming setting, this means having a diversity of crops and assuring that the success of the farm didn't rely solely on one food crop. I became interested in biodynamic farming strategies, which aim to emulate a healthy natural ecosystem by minimizing inputs from external sources and recycling nutrients. In order for this sort of farm to be successful, a diversity of food crops is necessary. While every biodynamic farm is different due to their own local circumstances, some common threads can be identified. Many biodynamic farms produce animals such as chickens, cows, and pigs. They also produce many varieties of vegetables and grains. The animals produce what some farmers might call brown gold, which makes synthetic fertilizer obsolete, while the production of vegetables and grains help to feed the animals. These food crops are engaging in reciprocity among each other. They help each other for the benefit of the group and subsequently themselves, as well as the farmer. From an economic standpoint, the farmer can rely on income from many species of plants and animals. If something unexpected occurs, such as a drought, some crops may fail, but the farm as a whole will remain viable. From another perspective, biodynamic farming allows food consumers to seek out locally produced food. Local people can buy a wide variety of food products from only a couple producers in a local environment, thus minimizing the greenhouse gas emissions related to food transportation. Now, we must pause for a moment and ask ourselves, why is this not already happening? And if we want our food system to be based around biodynamic farming, rather than monoculture, then who must take this action and make this change? Is it the responsibility of the farmer to change their production strategies? Is it up to the consumer to promote specific types of farming? Is it up to government entities to support specific types of farms? In my own consideration of this question, I looked back to some of the core principles of resilience, specifically diversity and reciprocity. In this case, every person must use the best methods suited to themselves in striving for this goal, while also supporting and respecting the methods of others. Therefore, a structural shift is not reliant upon one or even just a few strategies. I am sure that many people listening to this podcast can point to ways that this farming ethos is already being implemented. This is prevalent in the organic movement, as well as the increased demand for locally grown food. While this is an important piece of the puzzle, it puts much of the responsibility on upper-class people who can afford to pay more for their food. Marketing strategies such as these neglect the power and knowledge that marginalized people hold. A wide variety of strategies are needed in order to include everybody in this conversation, ranging from honoring indigenous land sovereignty to feeding homeless people with the recognition that food is a right, not a privilege. The movement to assure food security in future decades cannot be decoupled from any movement for social justice, just as production of one food crop shouldn't be decoupled from another, and the resilience of the farmer shouldn't be decoupled from the resilience of the land. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you are all staying safe and supporting each other in these trying times.